Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as I look at another by-election where Reform UK have scored a respectable share of the vote, I'd like to discuss why, although they're posing a massive problem for the Conservatives, they're not reaching UKIP levels of success. So in amongst the local and regional elections, we have had a Westminster by-election. Scott Benton's suspension and resignation triggered another opportunity for Labour to nick a Tory seat. Now, in this case, there was no great surprise about the result. The Tories only won by a small margin in 2019, so you would have expected this seat to flip back to Labour, even if they hadn't turned themselves into the ultra-efficient strategic machine they now are. That being said, Labour didn't just win, they smashed it with a massive swing towards them. Third biggest Tory to Labour swing of the post-war years. Labour's swing was higher than the polls predicted, another indicator that tactical voting is riding high. But an interesting result, an equally interesting result in fact, was Reform UK getting 16.8% of the vote to finish just over 100 votes short of the Conservative candidate. However, where Reform UK are not making any ground is in actually winning contests. Reform UK is essentially UKIP Mark III, really. So why isn't the upgraded version doing as well as their predecessor? UKIP not only won a Westminster seat, but they also won council seats. In 2015, when they were arguably at their peak, UKIP won over 200 seats in the local elections. Now, there were way more seats being contested in 2015 than this year. I'm not comparing raw numbers. I don't even know what Reform UK will end up on in terms of council seats won. But just to note that UKIP used to win a fair number of council seats and even won control of an entire council, and yet Reform UK not really translating their national message into any significant number of wins. They may win like a few. You know, they may win the odd council seat in the heart of Gammon country, but nothing which is going to show up in a league table of political parties. You know, they're polling third in the national polls, but they're not even in the top 5 in terms of local seats won in England. So, like, you know, take Plaid and the SNP out of it. Even in England, they're not in the top 5. And you probably can't even name 5 parties in England unless you are an aficionado of local elections. They're going to finish behind the Residents' Association. Now, why does this matter? After all, Reform UK are taking a lot of Conservative votes and they're helping deliver what may well be the Tories' worst ever result in the general election, maybe even all but wiping them out. Assuming they don't do a deal with each other, that is. Richard Tice insists they won't. He said today, oh, there's 110% certain we're not going to do a deal. But they said that in 2019. But as I keep saying, I am happy to believe there's a good chance they won't do a deal because I don't see how that helps Reform UK. It won't help the Tories win. In 2019, they were the difference. Like, it's not going to do that this time. It will just save them some seats. But despite what Tice says about his aims, it's clearly not the case that Reform UK exists to destroy the Conservative Party. How would that help? He is a Tory. He doesn't want to be a member of the Conservative Party because there's too many moderates there. He's like a Tory, you know, proper Tory. It's their aim to create something which becomes the Tory party, not the Conservative Party. You know, something that has the electability of brand Conservative Party with the extreme right-wing policies of Reform UK. Reform UK basically want the Conservative Party to be as it would be if all of their MPs were like Suella Braverman, Liz Truss, Robert Jenrick, people like that, right? Now, I would speculate, it's my speculation, that they think they just have to turn the Conservative Party into this far-right cult, then wait for Labour to fall from grace and that will be it. The exact mirrored thinking of the Corbynites a few years ago. Just take over the party, wait until the government fall, and then we will just walk over the ashes and take charge, right? That'll be it. The democracy as we know it will end in the UK. Obviously, if any of these people have ever read European history books, they've stopped when the fascists won power. Oh, brilliant, they won power. Yeah, we'll do that. And they didn't read the chapters that explained what happened a few years later to them. But Reform UK, in terms of their own aims, are still failing. Like, yes, they're gaining an increased share of the vote, in reality as well as in the polls with this Blackpool result, but they're not translating it into wins. Now, one of the better polling analysts, beyond Topline on Twitter, has suggested this is because they're only taking Conservative votes. Now, I think this is a huge part of the puzzle as to why Reform UK are just generally failing, despite how it might look. During UKIP's heyday, they were attracting former Conservative and Labour voters. You know, they were obviously they were harvesting the ones with an authoritarian point of view, anti-immigration, but some were left-wing economically and some were right-wing economically. And it's the same with the Brexit Party in 2019. Yes, they attracted more Conservative than Labour voters, but they were nonetheless hiving off votes from both. I would argue that collecting these voters together into one, at the time, anti-EU coalition then made it easy for the Conservatives to adopt those votes in 2019, powering their majority. Reform UK aren't doing the same. This is not only why they're not winning more than just a few council seats, but it's why it's hard to see how they meet their long-term aims. Unlike with UKIP, I don't think Reform UK see themselves as a genuinely new political force. Like UKIP are still trying to go right now. They're nowhere now. But they're still trying to, they did want to be a party, a proper party for the long term. I don't think Reform UK do. They've not set themselves up as a proper party. There are no members. There are subscribers, but no members. Control of party policy and selections is controlled by Richard Tice and literally 2 or 3 others. It's a private business masquerading as a political party. I think they just want to reform the Conservative Party, force it to become a far-right party down to its very roots. But if all they're doing is taking votes from the Conservatives, how does that work? I mean, let's imagine a scenario. Let's say there's no deal at this coming election. After all, they can't stop the Tories losing, but by standing against him, they can then claim to the Tories who have to rebuild afterwards, you're going to have to do a deal with us in future if you're ever to win again. That will empower the far-right MPs remaining to argue for the purging of all moderate policies. Let's say within the next 10 years, this project results in the Conservative leadership taking tighter and tighter control over the selection of candidates to make sure that only those with what are called pure Conservative values are selected, in reality far-right views. The entire party then goes into an election with only extreme candidates at a time where Labour have been in power for a while and losing support. Reform UK then agreed to step back because they're broadly happy with the Conservative policies at that point. And they think, then the Conservatives will win. But my issue is here, how will this deliver that far-right Conservative government? Because all Reform UK will do by standing down is return a load of those lost Conservative votes back to the Tories. Because they're not taking votes from Labour, they're not doing what UKIP did and helping be a bridge for Labour voters to the Tories. In fact, where Labour are losing votes right now is to the Greens. It's a much more credible to suggest that as Labour lose popularity in government, their votes will go to the Greens or the Lib Dems, not Reform UK or the Conservatives, particularly if the Conservatives keep shifting to the right. In fact, the Greens are actually taking about as many votes from the Conservatives as they are from Labour. So if there is going to be a party which starts to emerge as any sort of kingmaker in the future, then along with the Lib Dems, if they play their cards right, surely it's more likely to be the Greens than Reform UK. And as Luke Trill of More in Common has been pointing out today, there is a Labour-Green split developing on the left and there is a Conservative Reform split developing on the right. Here's the thing though, the Labour-Green split is only about a quarter of the Conservative Reform split. But also the Labour-Green split is concentrated in the cities. Well, these are the Labour strongholds. It's where Labour can afford to lose vote share. I mean, they've had a strategy of building vote share in marginal areas, knowing full well that means, because you can't please everyone in politics. So they've deliberately said, yeah, we're prepared to lose vote share in these areas where we're going to win anyway, in order to build it up in the areas where it's tighter. So in other words, it's not going to cost Labour in the general election. Yes, it is possible that the Greens may actually win 2 seats in this general election, although they might win none. But Reform UK are taking away Tory votes everywhere. The end result is Labour may lose an extra seat to the Greens this year, but the Tories are quite likely to lose 50 seats plus to Reform UK. And if the polls continue their current trajectory, it could be even worse for the Conservatives. But none of this is good news for Reform UK either. If they stand down at any point, all they do is return some Conservative voters back to the Conservative parties. It's not all of them, because Reform UK have been so successful in turning these voters away from the Conservative Party that if Reform UK did stand down, polling shows that some of these voters would still not vote for the Conservative Party again. You know, it's possible that Reform UK could change the Conservative Party into a committed far-right party. I can see the pathway for that. I've described it. I can absolutely see them. As long as they stand, as long as they can demonstrate they've cost the Tories a load of seats, saying you will never win another election unless you deal with us, that will prevent the moderates from regaining control of the party, you know, force a situation where the Conservative Party takes much more direct control over candidate selection, only allows the proper nutters to be candidates. So you have a future election where it's like only the lunatics are now in the party. That's it. I can see that. What I don't see is the pathway to turning them into an electable far-right party. To do that, Reform UK would need to attract votes beyond the they need to attract more than just Conservative voters. They need to attract voters who wouldn't normally see the Conservatives as a viable option in order to act as that bridge that UKIP did when a deal is eventually struck. Right now, Reform UK are simply not doing that. And as I say, given that disaffected Labour voters have other options when Labour lose popularity in a few years' time, I'm not sure I see this long-term plan working. I know we always have to be wary. I know people will say, oh, Phil, these have got the money behind them and populism does this and this and this. Yeah, absolutely. But it's not working. They're only taking votes from the Conservatives. And they can't possibly return all of them back when they stand down. And if Labour take this issue as seriously as they should and deliver well thought out electoral and media reform, I mean, Reform UK could be buggered. In fact, Reform UK's biggest threat, ironically, is actual reform of our systems. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.